It was an ordinary afternoon at the bank. I worked as a teller, and most of my day was spent dealing with customers, counting money, and smiling at faces I barely remembered. I never thought or expected what had happened that day to happen. I never knew the bank was about to become the backdrop for a nightmare I'd never be able to forget. It all began when I heard the sound of the front doors slamming open with a deafening crash. My head snapped up, and in that instant, everything changed. 5 men, each clad in black masks and wielding large firearms, stormed inside. The chaos unfolded too fast. People screamed, but their voices were drowned out by the men's harsh commands. "Everyone on the ground, don't move," one of them shouted. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, one of the men grabbed my arm and shoved me to the ground. My hands trembled as I pressed myself down. Within that time frame, they began herding everyone, bank employees, customers, everyone, out the door. "Move, get up," one of them barked. We were herded like cattle into a waiting truck. The whole ordeal was so fast, my mind couldn't process it. I noticed that the cameras were all shut off and that the truck we were led to had no license plates. We were packed into the back of the truck like sardines, dozens of us, shoulder to shoulder. It was suffocating and hot, and all I could hear were whispered prayers, desperate cries, and the occasional sob. My heart pounded as I thought about what they were going to do to us. The ride felt endless. When we finally stopped, they forced us out of the truck. We were taken into a large, cold building that looked abandoned. Inside, there were rows of small rooms, almost like prison cells. They shoved about 40 of us into one tiny room. It was cramped, dirty, and smelled terrible. About a few hours later, the real horror began. One of the cell doors was opened, and someone was taken. A guard had unlocked the door and pointed at a man to follow suit. Almost immediately, we heard begs and pleas. He was dragged out, the door slamming behind him. It was horrifying to witness, and even more terrifying to imagine experiencing it firsthand. From the end of the hallway, we heard shouting. One of the men was yelling, his voice angry and loud like he was demanding something. The sound cut through the silence sharply. Almost immediately, we heard several gunshots, one after another. Then his voice returned, this time colder and filled with menace. "The more time you waste, the more casualties there'll be." My body went numb as his words sank in. A cold, suffocating fear crept over me. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what was happening. I glanced around the room, seeing the same terror mirrored on everyone's faces. Some cried softly, while others sat frozen, staring blankly at the floor. Every few hours, another person was taken. The pattern was always the same. Someone would be dragged out, the yelling would start, and then bang. I tried not to think about it, but the reality was impossible to ignore. They were killing us one by one. I couldn't stop shaking. I had never been so terrified in my life, knowing that in the next minutes I could be taken away and killed. About a day into this ordeal, I noticed something. One of the guards had fallen asleep in a chair outside the room. In his pocket, I saw something, a shiny, familiar shape. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was sticking out just enough for me to recognize it. It definitely looked like a phone. At first, I dismissed it. Sure, it was a phone, but what could I do with a phone that wasn't mine? It was probably locked, and besides, what was I supposed to do? Ask him to let me borrow it to make a call? The thought felt ridiculous. But then, a wild idea struck me. Clinging to the smallest glimmer of hope, I slowly whispered as quietly as I could, "Hey Siri." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard it, the soft, robotic reply. I almost cried. Relief and hope surged through me like never before. I couldn't understand why a guard would have such a sophisticated phone with Siri activated, but I didn't care. This mistake was about to save us. "Turn on location services," I whispered.
Location services is now on for this device.
I could feel my hands shaking uncontrollably, but I kept going. "Hey Siri," I said again, my voice steadier this time. "Dial 911.
Calling emergency services on speaker.
The room was silent as the call connected. I could barely hear the operator over the pounding of my heart. I whispered quickly, explaining everything, where we were, what was happening, and that the phone's location was on. "Please, send help," I begged. "They're going to kill us." "We're sending help," the operator said. Just try and stay on the line if you can." Tears filled my eyes. I wasn't sure if they'd make it in time, but it was the first glimmer of hope we'd had since this nightmare began. Minutes later, chaos erupted. Outside the building, we heard shouting. The men scrambled as they tried to fend off the police and Secret Service agents who were descending on the compound, but they were no match for the well-coordinated raid. Our location had been tracked in real time. Doors began bursting open as officers stormed in. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing in relief. The aftermath was a blur of questions and medical checkups. To this day, I don't know why one of them made such a careless mistake. But that mistake saved my life and the lives of dozens of others. The fear of those days never left me. I'm grateful to be alive, and every time I look at an iPhone, I can't help but smile. But a lesson I have learned is that even in the darkest moments, a tiny spark of hope can make all the difference. If you enjoy our videos, please do not forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications. I attended this small birthday party hosted by my friend Sarah. It was held at a bar not too far from my home. Initially, I was skeptical about going, and I even called her to let her know I might not make it. But the way she sounded on the phone made me feel like I was being a terrible friend, like I didn't take our friendship seriously or didn't care about her as her best friend. Long story short, I decided to go. There were about 12 attendees, 5 guys and 7 girls. Mind you, I was only 17 at the time. My car had some issues, so I had to Uber there. I remember getting ridiculously high from the shots I was pressured into taking while we played one of those silly dare games. You know, the kind teenagers play to push each other into doing wild things. Around 11 p.m., I decided it was time to head home. I'm not the type to stay out late, and honestly, this was the latest I had ever been out. I stood outside the bar, trying to book a ride, when a sleek black Mercedes-Benz pulled up in front of me. The tinted glass rolled down, revealing a man in the driver's seat. He looked clean-cut and handsome, with one of the most charming smiles I'd ever seen. The scent wafting from his car was intoxicating, rich and luxurious. He looked at me with an inviting smile and said, "Where are you headed?" I hesitated for a moment, then replied, I'm heading home." "Let me give you a ride," he said without missing a beat. At first, I hesitated. Getting into a stranger's car at this time of the night, it was definitely not a smart move. But I felt so much aura from him, it overshadowed my skepticism. In fact, he came across as a perfect gentleman. Against my better judgment, I decided to accept the ride. Once inside, I told him the name of my neighborhood, and we started the journey. That's when things got weird. Almost immediately, he began asking me strange questions. What would a younger version of yourself think about you now? The question caught me off guard. I stammered something vague in response, unsure of what to say. Then came the next question. Would you rather murder 3 innocent children or watch 3 of your loved ones die in front of you? He asked it with a wide, creepy smile, as if the thought genuinely amused him. I turned to him, feeling a wave of discomfort wash over me. What the hell, I thought to myself. It wasn't just the question, it was the way he asked it. Suddenly, the safe aura I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by fear and disgust. I felt so uncomfortable I decided to tell him to drop me off. Just drop me off here, I would find my way. But as soon as I said that, he fell completely silent. I noticed his grip tightened on the steering wheel as he kept driving. And then I realized we weren't headed towards my area. The streets we were now on looked unfamiliar. The bright city lights I had seen moments ago were gone, replaced by long stretches of empty road. I felt my chest tighten as panic began to set in. "Hey, where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. I repeated myself louder this time. "Where are we going? This isn't the way to my neighborhood." Still, he didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at me briefly with a menacing expression that sent a chill down my spine. I reached for my phone, but before I could get it out of my bag, he lunged forward, grabbed the bag, rolled down his window, and threw it out. And then he said to me, "You seem nervous. Relax, we'll get there soon." My mind was spinning now, trying to make sense of what was happening. The warm, safe vibe he had projected earlier had completely vanished, replaced by something dark and unpredictable. I knew I had to act fast. My options were limited, but I wasn't going to sit there and wait to see what he had in mind to do to me. My eyes darted toward the door handle, and I discreetly tested it. To my relief, it wasn't locked. My heart pounded in my chest as I weighed the risks. Could I really jump out while the car was moving? What if I didn't land right? What if I hurt myself, or worse? But then again, I was already feeling disoriented from the shots I had taken earlier. Maybe that's why I didn't overthink it. Maybe that's why, in a moment of pure adrenaline-fueled desperation, I just did it. I grabbed the handle, yanked the door open, and threw myself out of the car. The impact was brutal. I hit the pavement hard, the rough surface tearing into my knees and elbows. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't care. All I could think about was putting as much distance as possible between me and that car. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the blood dripping from my scrapes, and sprinted toward the nearest light I could see in the distance, a gas station. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasp, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. But I didn't stop. When I finally reached the gas station, I burst through the door, startling the attendant inside. Barely able to speak through my ragged breaths, I begged him to call the police. As I stood there, trembling and trying to calm down, I glanced out the window and saw the black Mercedes-Benz creeping past the station, and then immediately sped off before I could point it out to anyone. I don't know what his intentions were that night, and honestly, I don't want to know. But every time I think about it, I'm haunted by the same thought. If I hadn't jumped out when I did, I might not be here to tell this story.